Hey guys, it's NerdGasm. If you watched one of my previous game reviews on the original Marvel Ultimate Alliance, then you would know that it's one of my favorite superhero games ever made, and one I revisit every few years or so. When it was announced that it would get a sequel in late 2009, I couldn't contain my excitement. I wanted to play it so bad. Raven Software, the developer behind the original Ultimate Alliance game, as well as the two Marvel-themed RPGs that came out before it, X-Men Legends and X-Men Legends 2 Rise of Apocalypse, were out though, and would be replaced by Vicarious Visions. Because of this, Ultimate Alliance 2 doesn't feel like a direct continuation of the first game, as much as it should, and any story elements Raven Software had left behind were completely forgotten about in favor of something else entirely, which is unfortunate. Now, I'm just gonna go out and say that while I do still enjoy Marvel Ultimate Alliance 2, I was unimpressed with a lot of the changes that were made with it, and I think it pales in comparison to the three previous games that had come before it. Is it terrible? Of course not, but without question, it was a huge disappointment, and I don't think it holds up as well as its predecessors. Ultimate Alliance 2 draws heavy inspiration from the 2006 storyline Civil War, which centers around the Superhero Registration Act that splits the Avengers and other Marvel heroes into two separate factions, one led by Tony Stark that supports the act, and another led by Captain America that opposes it. The Civil War story had only been out a few years before it was being adapted into this game, and the storyline itself has been a polarizing comic ever since its release with fans, so I'm not sure it was the best one to choose to make a video game about, but I digress. Other elements, like the game's intro and Latveria, borrow from the 2004 storyline Secret War as well, not to mention the inclusion of Lucia von Bardas and the idea of supervillains receiving a form of high-tech upgrading, so to speak, which we will get to in a second. Honestly, I didn't mind the Civil War aspect of this story, and it's kind of a cool setup for an Ultimate Alliance game, leading to the breakup of heroes into two separate factions that fight each other. It had some potential. I also think the way the game goes about explaining the creation of the act to be fairly interesting. It takes a few different directions than the comic, and even other forms of media have. Everything is set in motion with the Secret War elements. Nick Fury's unauthorized attack on Latveria, which seemingly kills the Prime Minister Lucia von Bardas, whom the US government had been trying to build an alliance with, which obviously pisses them off. Von Bardas had been supplying weapons to the Tinkerer and other supervillains, and though she is presumed dead following the attack, she returns as a cyborg and ends up destroying a portion of New York City in retaliation, which of course also upsets the US government, and Maria Hill steps in to become the new director of S.H.I.E.L.D. Nick Fury would go AWOL, and the heroes would turn sour towards him. His actions in Latveria lead to the Superhuman Registration Act debate, which also causes tension between Captain America and Iron Man. Things reach a boiling point when the New Warriors battle with the supervillain Nitro on live TV, and he activates his power of self-detonation, which kills over 600 people in Stamford, Connecticut. This event causes Congress to rush the passage of the Superhuman Registration Act. When the SRA goes through, the player is given a choice to either side with Captain America or side with Iron Man, which affects the missions you and your team go on moving forward, or at least until the Civil War stuff ends about halfway through the game and we move on to something else, and oh boy, is it something else. Regardless of which side you choose, the levels and missions remain virtually untouched, but are just experienced through a different lens, such as raiding a hideout or defending it, or attacking a convoy or escorting it, so nothing too monumentally different. When I play this game, I usually side with Captain America, because I actually agree with his stance on the Superhuman Registration Act, the government being the ones to regulate if and when a hero can use their powers, and for what reason, is just unethical, to say the least. Turning them into law enforcement that hunt down other superhumans, or worse, making them militarized weapons, goes against everything a superhero should represent. While Ultimate Alliance 2's adaptation of Civil War isn't the strongest or the most fleshed out, I think we have seen far better adaptations of it in recent years. Outside of the comics, I do still commend Vicarious Visions for at least attempting it in video game form. Problem is, the pacing in this game is horrendous, and about halfway through, the narrative begins to break down, and as a result, turns incredibly weak by the end. The Civil War stuff is fairly interesting and engaging, all things considered, but eventually, the pro-registration side begins using nanite technology to take over the minds of supervillains, so they can aid them in their cause, which is completely moronic. Nothing could ever go wrong with that, right? Wrong. The nanites begin to go haywire and spread all over the world like a techno-virus with a hive mind, forcing the two opposing factions of heroes to join forces once again and stop it. The story culminates with a battle with the Tinkerer, who had been behind the nanite technology all along, despite working with Tony Stark and Reed Richards to put them into all the supervillains. How did anyone not see this swerve coming from a mile away? On top of the Tinkerer, you also face off against Nick Fury of all people, who had been captured by the nanites, referring to themselves as the Fold, and is integrated into their hive mind or some shit. He basically becomes part nanite or part robot, with the abilities of Electro, A-Bomb, Bishop, Havoc, Firestar, and Multiple Man. It sounds really cool, but in actuality it's pretty lame. All in all, I find the story of Ultimate Alliance 2 to be kind of a mess. It's all over the place and doesn't know what it wants to be at times. It lacks focus and seems to be trying way too much all at once. It doesn't help that the Civil War elements are very political heavy too, which might turn some people away, and the missions and environments in this game are pretty bland and feel like they bleed together by the end. Lots of city streets, rooftops, labs, prisons. They get stale really fast and lack the variety the first game had with its levels, even those found in the X-Men Legends games. While I was playing Ultimate Alliance 2 again and recording the footage for this review, I think I was having fun for the first half of my playthrough. After that, things were starting to look all too similar, and the whole experience became rather boring and repetitive. It was a slog to get through. The only levels that stood out to me were Latveria in the intro, the mission where you get to fight Yellow Jacket, Giant Man, and I guess Wakanda, so like 3, maybe. Marvel Ultimate Alliance 2, much like its predecessors, is an action RPG. You gain experience, level up, upgrade abilities and powers, same old stuff as before, so I won't get into it all again. The Ultimate Alliance and X-Men Legends games have never been the most complicated and intricate in terms of their RPG elements, but with Ultimate Alliance 2, it feels as though Vicarious Visions made it even more simplistic than it was before. Each character has only 4 powers at their disposal now, unlike the previous games where you could switch them all out from a larger list. The additional abilities you can upgrade as well that give you different benefits for each character seem very lackluster, and aren't that unique when you take into account that several characters share the exact same ones now, which is no fun. Ultimate Alliance 2 introduces new fusion attacks that can be performed by combining the abilities of 2 characters. Prior to the game's release, they were promoted as being unique, and that each hero had a different fusion attack with every other character in the game. The combinations seemed endless. While the animations differ from fusion attack to fusion attack, many of them still feel very similar. I mean, you have ones that utilize beams that you direct throughout an area, ones that allow you to target a specific group of enemies or a lone enemy, some that pull them towards you, and ones that have you smash the ground or cause damage to the entire screen in some way to clear it out. Again, the animations differ, but these fusions are really only made up of like 4 or 5 different types. The first few times you do them, they look amazing, but I find the gimmick gets stale really fast, and I just stop utilizing them unless it's a boss battle or something. I prefer the ultimate moves from the original games. At least then they were all unique and individualized to each character. There was a lot more personality behind them. Here, they feel far too similar. Another change that was made is that each character only has one alternate attire now, which more often than not looks like complete shit. The costumes don't even give you any special perks like they did in the first game either. You also can't assign gear to each one of your heroes that give them unique bonuses, and instead, there is this medal system where you equip 3 boosts at a time that affect the entire team, not just one character. And when speaking to NPCs, you have dialogue choices that can be made. One is aggressive, one is diplomatic, and one is defensive, apart from unlocking a few boosts after doing a certain amount of each, and of course affecting the response you get from them. They don't alter the gameplay in any other way, which feels kind of pointless. Why did they include these? And let's talk about the roster, because to be honest, in Ultimate Alliance 2, it's really weak when you compare it to the original games. It's got about the same number of characters in this game to choose from, 23, but is missing the likes of Doctor Strange, Ghost Rider, and Blade, which kind of sucks. New additions include the Green Goblin, Hulk, Songbird, Venom, and Penance, originally Speedball in the comics, who was rebranded during the Civil War event. The main reason the roster is so weak in my opinion, apart from the story being based on Civil War, is because it utilizes too many characters we had seen before in previous games, Ultimate Alliance 1 and the X-Men Legends series. There aren't enough fresh faces here. It doesn't help that when the Superhuman Registration Act comes into effect during the events of the story, it splits up the heroes into a pro-registration side led by Iron Man and an anti-registration side led by Captain America. So, certain characters become locked for about half the game depending on which side they ally with and which side you choose, limiting the options for your own team. Mind you, many characters are neutral and can be chosen regardless of whether or not you ally with Iron Man or Captain America when the time comes. There are also DLC characters like Juggernaut, Black Panther, Carnage, Magneto, Psylocke, and Cable that help pad out the roster and are much needed additions, but unfortunately I never ended up paying for them, probably because I wasn't the biggest fan of this game to begin with. Ultimate Alliance 2, as well as the original, were ported to the PlayStation 4 in 2016, including all of their exclusive DLC, but I had the PS3 version at the time still, and didn't feel that it was worthwhile to get it again, something I have since regretted, though apparently both ports were kind of buggy, so maybe not. Activision has since lost their publishing rights to Marvel games, so both Ultimate Alliances have been removed off of PSN, and I have no way of getting this DLC, and I probably never will now, which is kind of sad. Regardless, I should be reviewing the base content of Ultimate Alliance 2, and if you need DLC characters to make a game more enjoyable, more playable, something is definitely wrong with its foundation. Alright, so I feel like I've been digging into this game too much. Maybe I should state a few positives that I enjoy about it. For one, its graphics are much more polished than they were in the original game, even if the colors are a bit washed out to match the style of the Civil War comic. And though I don't enjoy some of the changes made to the RPG elements and the new fusion attacks, the gameplay, the combat itself, is definitely more refined than it was in the first Ultimate Alliance. Like I had mentioned before, I think the Civil War aspect of the story, having the heroes break up into two factions and you picking between them, had a lot of potential, and in my opinion, is the stronger half of the story, even if it wasn't executed as well as it could have been. They didn't have to copy the comic as much as they did, and they should have incorporated a stronger villain as the main focus, narratively speaking, for the last half of the story, like maybe Ultron or Baron Zemo, for example. Much like the original Ultimate Alliance 2 features a large cast of characters from the Marvel Universe, which makes it feel grand and epic in scale. You'll find yourself interacting with many of your favorites, and even facing off against some underappreciated villains such as Grim Reaper, A-Bomb, Whirlwind, and Titanium Man, just to name a few. Stan Lee himself even makes a cameo in this game as a New York senator you have to rescue, Senator Lieber, using his real last name, and it was his first physical cameo he had ever made in a video game at that point, which is kinda cool. The main theme of Ultimate Alliance 2 is failure, and it's got it in spades. Nick Fury and the other heroes face consequences for their actions in Latveria, consequences that send shockwaves throughout the Marvel Universe. The failure of the New Warriors in their attempted apprehension of Nitro is the final straw that leads to the creation of the Superhuman Registration Act, And when Iron Man, being the dumbass that he is, lacking any and all forethought, decides to inject nanites into supervillains to aid them in their battle against the anti-registration heroes, well, he ends up failing the entire fucking world at that point, doesn't he? And let's not forget Vicarious Visions. They failed all of us when they decided to adapt the Civil War storyline. Instead of the Galactus follow-up, Raven Software had seemingly promised at the end of Ultimate Alliance 1. Okay, so that last one is a bit of a joke, but honestly, I think we all would have preferred a story like that instead of the one we got here. Maybe it exists in an alternate reality or something. One could only hope. But apart from all of that, there really isn't much more I can say about Marvel Ultimate Alliance 2. There isn't much more I want to say. It isn't a terrible superhero game by any means, but I did find it to be a huge disappointment when it came out back in 2009, and even when I play it today, I find it difficult to stay fully invested with it, fully engaged. I think its story fizzles out and becomes stale by the end. The nanite stuff just didn't work for me and wasn't all that interesting. The levels and environments felt too repetitive and boring as well, lacking the vibrant colors and variety of the originals. Doom's Castle, Asgard, the Valley of the Spirits, Mephisto's Realm, Murder World, they all had so much more personality than any of the environments featured here. If you haven't played Ultimate Alliance 2 before and you can pick it up relatively cheap, I'd say give it a try, it wouldn't hurt. But if you aren't that big of a fan of the Civil War storyline from the comics, then you need to factor that in as well because the game draws from it quite a bit, especially in the first half or so. This has been NerdGasm. I want to thank everybody who participated in my Patreon poll to determine the topic of this video. If you enjoyed the review, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that bell icon to be notified of all future content I release. If you'd like to help support me, and even suggest topics for future video game or comic book reviews, head on over to patreon.com and check out all the rewards I've got over there. I want to thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Take care and stay nerdy. It's what I love about you.
You don't say.